Thank you so much for joining us. We'd like to begin by acknowledging that we host this roundtable in a digital space that you could say is anchored in a physical space. And that physical space is Tiohtià:ke, or so-called Montreal, which is the unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, or the Mohawk people, the people of the Flint, are part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and it is on their land that we live and work. Pour nos amis francophones, cette présentation sera pour la plupart en anglais. La traduction en français est disponible. So we'd like to thank Talisman Theater for this platform, Lynn Paquette, the artistic director for Talisman Theater. She is in attendance and she is here and happy to answer your questions, but wanted here for this roundtable to create a space for various perspectives to be shared. So let's get to introducing you to our wonderful panel for this roundtable. Sophie.
Thank you, Akil. So I'll start by introducing Fouad Ahmed. Fouad Ahmed is a graduate of the Canadian Film Centre's Actors Conservatory and a recipient of Reel Canada's RBC Emerging Artist Award, best known for his breakout role as Dr. Ned Patel in the World War II drama Bomb Girls. He recently published an article in the CBC titled, "I had to change my Arabic name to make it as an actor. Now I'm reclaiming it." Fouad, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Ghassan Zakaria, he is a writer and documentary filmmaker with experience in translation, and I appreciate his approving smile. He has extensive screenwriting and TV writing experience. In late 2013, he was forced to leave Syria for Lebanon and then France. His most recent, and according to him, most important writing credits were Yarmouk, a 3-episode radio play in English produced by BBC4, and Elle est belle la France, a feature film currently in post-production. He is currently working on a 20-episode biopic to be produced in the Middle East. Ghassan, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'll introduce Hoda Adra. So Hoda is a spoken word poet and filmmaker with a practice rooted in writing as resistance and self-inscription. Born in Lebanon and raised in Saudi Arabia and adopted by Montreal, this triangle inspired her first album, La Liberté des Sens. Hoda is currently in residency at the MAI, Montreal Arts Interculturel, and at Maine Film, and an alumna of the Banff Centre's spoken word program. Hoda, welcome.
Thank you, Sophie.
And so it's my pleasure to introduce Sophie El Assad, who you have heard from. She is the director of this enhanced reading. She's an award-winning theater and visual artist based in Montreal, also a friend of many of us. She works professionally as a designer while maintaining a personal practice as a visual artist, writer, and director. Sophie's desire to remain connected with her heritage has led her to the creation and development of politically engaging work on Middle Eastern representation, girlhood, and the environment, created using striking visuals, I agree, and interdisciplinary approaches such as dance, poetry, film, and sculpture. Sophie, hello.
Hello. And now I have the privilege of introducing everyone to Akil Virani. So Akil Virani is an award-winning visual artist and filmmaker, awarded as the 2018 Artist for Peace by the Quebec-based artist collective Les Artistes pour la Paix. Akil Virani is an Ismaili Muslim visual artist of Indian and French heritage who blurs the line between art and activism, often integrating public participation into his socially conscious art projects. That same year, in 2018, he collaborated with playwright Erin Lindsay and Imago Theatre's Micheline Chevrier to present a feminist portrait series and audiovisual installation celebrating 12 publicly nominated inspiring women. Akil is currently in the 2021 Artist in Residence at the Canadian Museum of Immigration. Learn more about his work at akil.ca.
Thank you, Sophie. So I want to start us off quick with one sentence from each of you. So I want you to tell us one sentence and start it with the words, watching Antioch made me feel. Watching Antioch made me feel. Sophie, why don't we start with you?
Well, I just want to clarify for the viewers that actually no one here has watched the production yet because it's still in production, but perhaps we can just reframe it as how do we feel after reading the original text? I would say that I felt full of emotion.
Great. And Fuad, why don't you go next here? One sentence.
Reading Antioch made me feel.
I loved it. All right, Ghassan, one sentence.
I'm not good at this, but I'll try. Reading Antioch made me feel that there was a lot of good intentions with unfortunate execution.
Thank you. And Huda.
Reading Antioch made me feel sidestepped.
I'll add that reading Antioch and watching Antioch made me feel a mix of emotions. One of them was a longing to further understand my parents, who have a vastly different life experience than me, and don't always understand my decisions either. So before we dive into some of these very complex and heavier issues, I did want to give Sophie the chance to explain a bit of the context. So Sophie, why don't you tell us a bit about how this came about your relationship with the playwright, about being asked to work on this, and some of your concerns while you developed this project.
Okay, I'll try and keep it as contained as possible, but just to give a little bit of context, the play was written by acclaimed Québécois writer Sarah Berthiaume, and it premiered in 2018 at Le Théâtre d'Aujourd'hui here in Montreal. So I'll start by saying that when I was first introduced to the play, I found that as an art form, it was very beautiful to me, and I thought that the text provided very interesting like ways of presenting using poetry and rhythm, and I loved the use of contrast, and I liked, you know, the idea of merging history with the present and blurring lines between reality and memory and dream, and there's a real interesting surreal quality that I found in this play. I also really appreciated that the three characters were complex female lead roles, and I found that there was lots of heavy emotion that I feel like I got a grasp of. But however, on an intellectual level, I had issues with the way in which the Middle East and Islam were presented to me. And so particularly in the context of being, you know, of thinking of the place and time in which it was presented. So I think that the fact that it was presented in Quebec with an audience majority audience would have been born and raised here, most likely, with no experience of the Middle East, would have nothing really to nuance a lot of the words that were being spoken by the character of Inas, whereas they would have a lot to balance off the character of Lily. So I thought that it was already not a fair game in that sense. And I'd also just like to say that I questioned the responsibility of depicting Middle East in this particular context when thinking about what a lot of the audience members would have had experience in would have solely been the media. And at the time, if you think about 2018, would have been full of, you know, images of the war and ISIS, and also we're talking about a province in Canada where La Loi 21 has caused a lot of pain to a lot of members of our community, and just by having a woman from the Middle East in this text, a character, say such terrible things about Islam and about the veil, I had trouble with that. I didn't think it was very responsible. And I thought it was a little dangerous. And so just entering this project, I felt I needed to do a lot of research in the text and flag a lot of what I felt was misleading propositions. And so I went in and tried to see if there are places where I could edit or find ways of making it more inclusive. And I interviewed a number of artists and academics. So one of them was Ghassan, who was very, very insightful, and I had such a great, we talked for 2 hours. It was an amazing conversation. And I guess it all came down to a conversation that I had with Sarah Berthiaume after that. We looked at the changes made and the propositions, and she listened, and she was very acknowledging of the problems in the text and very open to making those changes. And she brought a very interesting point that it stayed with me about how she perceived theater, and she mentioned that it was, it's a political vehicle that needs to be changed, and that needs to adapt, and that needs to live, and it can't stay as it is. So she was very happy to make those changes and acknowledge them. And so I guess that in a way influenced my decision to work on this project. I saw it as a possibility to revolt in some way by doing things like this roundtable, and I got inspiration from the characters themselves. Antigone is a character that in the text she says she's the archetype of adolescent revolt against the system. Mm-hmm. And so I saw this as an opportunity to revolt as well. And of course, I also want to say that not producing this play is also a very good act of revolt, but my decision was to do it. And I also saw it as a great opportunity to see if there is a way to reclaim the Middle Eastern identity that I feel was unfairly taken away from the characters and from the community that were part of that. So in our adaptation, there were a lot of changes that we made, like here, not a lot, I have to say, I wanted to honor the text as much as I could, but there are some things that I felt just had to be removed. So certain words that were repeated, like the use of the word veil, the use of the word beard, the use of the word death, a lot of unnecessary intonations that I felt were just not contributing in a way that the writer intended to. I also really wanted to, there's some things where I felt like, why not acknowledge the amazing history of the Middle East? Like when there's reference to Marco Polo, why not bring up Ibn Battuta, who is, even more prolific, but we don't even hear about him. So I wanted to find ways of being inclusive in that way. There were other things that we did, like changing names of the characters to make it more authentic. So originally in the text, Lily in the film is originally called Jade, and Ines is called Ines. So there were some discrepancies based on the writer's intent versus the reality, where Jade is a very common boy's name in the Middle East, and it added complexities to the characters that the writer didn't want to include. So there was just some things there. Ines versus Ines, so the location of where those names come from in the region. So there's a lot of research done there in terms of that.
And it was really interesting for us to get the script and to see those particular details changed. I want to bring in Ghassan first, who mentioned good intentions, right, which maybe didn't hit the mark. Tell us what you meant by that, Ghassan, and then we'll hear from some other folks.
Okay. Well, I think the intention of the play is excellent. You know, to tell young women not to go to ISIS, to join ISIS. But I think there is a lot of I can't call it anything but ignorance about Syria, which I don't blame the writer for, because you know, what can we do? Before the Syrian uprising, no one even knew where it is on the map. In short, I felt that no one in the time where Inas is supposed to have fled Syria, no one fled for religious reasons from Syria back at that time. Actually, those who mostly fled were the Muslim Brotherhood, who are actually religious and who are oppressed, regardless of what we think of them. And on the other hand, I felt that like there was, and I think we talked about this with Sophie and I, that there were a lot of missed references. For example, Antigone, I didn't feel that she was used to her full potential as this character with its huge legacy and history from Sophocles to Jean Anouilh. Actually, and Antioch itself, the city, has a huge Christian importance that wasn't at all alluded to. And of course, what Sophie mentioned just now about how Islam is presented, which again, I think that there was no malice behind this. No one wanted to, you know, to badmouth Islam as a religion, but it's very easy to badmouth Islam today for many reasons, and it costs no one anything, almost anything.
Yeah, thank you,
So,
thank you, Ghassan.
yeah, that's what I think.
And perfect, and yeah, so I want to bring in Huda here. Are good intentions enough, Huda? I want to hear from you about that balance, right? And if you want to explain a bit about what you felt about the play.
I mean, intentions are a starting point, but I feel like there comes a point where curiosity has to come in. And I don't agree with Ghassan, who said that before the war no one knew about Syria. I think not a lot of North Americans maybe knew about Syria, but if you look at if you center the planet or the globe to like east more, I mean, everyone knows where Syria is and everyone knows about Syria. And actually,
I mostly meant North Americans. Sorry, go on.
No, but because we tend to forget, because when we come here, we start thinking that everyone is just North American. So that's the thing, is who's the audience? Like the intention is like, are you including me? Do you think that I, as a Muslim, or as an Arab, or as a person who came from across the ocean, do you think that I'm included as a viewer? And are you trying to bring something extra to my viewership?
Yeah, it's a great point. Fouad, you sighed when asked how you felt, and I loved that. Tell us how you reacted.
Well, I mean, there's been a lot of talk of intention. I was confused by the intention. Intention means nothing if the impact is negative. I don't care how good the intentions are. If the end impact is something that's going to cause harm to people, then you need to reframe why that was your intention. Why would someone think they have to do a little bit deeper work on themselves, I'd say, to figure out why someone chose to spend the time and energy to create this world when it could have gone to something else without creating all this other stuff. And I think for me, the sigh is because being a performer for the last 20 years is I have seen the evolution of Muslim portrayal from post 9/11 to now. And we can say, oh, George Floyd changed everything, BLM. There's still a lot of work left to do. I don't know if any of the change that has come is tokenism or if it's actual change. So to read something like this, where it's like, that's why it was a sigh for me.
Yeah, I agree. And so one question that comes to mind for me, when the intention and the impact are so different, right? And I agree that intention isn't enough. It's simply a detail in some ways. How does that happen? In my opinion, it might happen if you're writing about a story that you're uninformed about or that isn't the story of your community. So what I'm getting at here is a white writer, right?
It's a hot topic. Sorry to interrupt, but like, it was like Syria's trendy right now, right? It's
Yeah.
trendy, so let's make something about it.
Yeah, totally. And so one question is, what stories are we allowed to tell? Should we stay away? And let's name it specifically. Should a white Quebecois writer stay away from the story of a community that is not theirs? 100% of the time. Where's the nuance here? How much is enough information for someone to feel a part of that story enough to write about it? Huda, we'll start with you on that question.
To make the answer very like direct, I feel like anyone who wants to is interested in talking about a culture that is not theirs has to be first trauma informed. Like you need to know what that culture has been through and try to not only reduce the damage that you might make by creating, because who cares? Theater is great in like North America, but at the moment theater, let's say in Syria, is not like saving lives, you know? So if you want to make this extra step of creation, like, can you not only repair and rectify, but can you also uphold something you know, bigger than like bigger than what you think is already good, you know what I mean? Like, why would you take something and make it like I mean, I think it's ignorance. Like, I think also it's not as a pejorative ignorance, but just like it takes a lot to know about other cultures. It takes time and it takes energy and it takes research. And so I feel like that's what it takes. And then it takes collaboration. Like if you're a single person and you want to write about something that's not from your like background, well, go out and meet 5 people who are from this background and also ask permission and like get consultants, because like obviously you need, you know, these people to vouch and to make sure that the audience that's going to receive it is going to feel safe receiving it and also gain something, because it's about the gaze. Like I want to be presented a gaze that's not going to make other people's gazes worse on me, you know?
I want to ask the group, in what situation is research enough? Okay, so you have an artist doing research, right? What is actual meaningful collaboration look like, as opposed to I did some Googling and I talked to some friends? Fouad, you made a face, I appreciated it. Tell me what you're thinking, and then others.
A huge trend in the industry right now is using story consultants. It's using consultants and giving the people that give all the information, all the training, a consultant credit. What we need to be doing is empowering those consultants and making them writers instead of asking them to be consultants. They should not be credited as consultants. They should be put in positions of the same amount of privilege and power that the white counterparts, they get to call themselves the playwrights, right? But there has been a systemic suppression of non-white talent across the board. And writers is one of them, playwrights is one of them. It goes a lot more than saying, oh, you know, what can we do for research? And it has to do with growing the authentic storytellers and giving them the power to tell these stories properly, so that this story, you know, from this perspective shouldn't be created. But if it was created from the authentic perspective, then we would have had something completely different to talk about today.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. Ghassan, and then Sophie.
Well, I have a quick comment about the earlier question. I don't think we should stop anyone from saying anything. Personally, she has the right to write a play about a community that's not hers. The problem, we all do it actually. I as a writer, I wrote seven television series. None of them was about my exact community, because I live in a community that doesn't exist anywhere actually, because I'm from a country that I don't resemble very much, etc. It's a long story, and I think Huda would recognize this better if she was living in Lebanon and in a certain neighborhood in Beirut and was asked to do something about another neighborhood, she would have to do a huge amount of research, because we live in very complicated societies. But in any case, I think the problem of Antioch is not that the writer is writing about a community that's not hers. I think that she is telling the story of the fear of her community, of her own community, through the story of another community, which probably made her feel entitled to not not go deep enough into research. When is research enough? I have no idea. I think that what Huda and Ahmed proposed is an important step in the right direction. If we want to tell authentic stories about real communities, we need nuance, and nuance comes from as much diversity of opinions and of gazes, as Huda said, as possible. And also, we need to ask ourselves better, why do we want to tell this story? And that's where it comes from. If you want to tell that story because you care about the people of whom you're telling the story, whose stories you're telling, you'll get somewhere. But when you want to tell me that you're scared of this weird religion, it's not going to work. It's not going to come out well. It's not going to come out well. There is a lovely rule that I myself try to follow. You should tell your audience what they don't like to hear if you want to make a change. So if you're presenting to white audience, you should, for me, my view of the moral responsibility of a storyteller or a writer is to search for what this audience has to do to change things, not what someone behind a computer across the ocean has to do or has to disappear from our eyes so we can be comfortable again.
Yeah, thank you. Let's get Sophie and then Huda afterwards.
I guess just quickly touching base on what Hassan just said, like, I agree, and I don't even think that Quebecois audiences learned anything new from the character of Ines. Like, everything that she said was on the news or on like something that we've already, like, the Western world has only seen. So there was no discovery in that character, and there was nothing that a Middle Eastern audience could connect with either, other than like the pain and the trauma that she was going through. I'll let Huda speak while I think about.
Yeah, I wanted to add to what Hassan said. It was, yes, what is the audience learning, but also if I'm going to watch something about my community that's written by someone who's not from my community, can that play teach me something about the harm that was done to my community that comes from the Western community? Like, you know what I mean? Like I want to learn something new too. Like, can I say the anecdote, but in very short, that I told you? I was approached as a consultant on something that was a very bad very bad timing and not processed yet. Basically, a Quebecois writer wrote about the explosion that happened in Beirut, and I couldn't even read the text. Like my eyes wanted to just pop out. I couldn't read it, like literally. And I thought about it so much, and I'm like, what am I learning from this? And I had the discussion with them and talked about this whole, like, you're not allowed to take people's trauma and appropriate it, and we're not even ready. I'm not even, like, even now I'm shaking from talking about it. I'm not ready to process it yet, not in my personal life, not in the public sphere yet. There's that, but then I was like, can you tell me where you come in to this explosion? Can you tell me, can you do research on where, like, I don't know, the gas bombs or the bullets come from that arrive to our countries? Can you make a documentary theater play about literally across the Saint Laurent, all of these corporations that make weapons? Can you denounce them and then see how our stories are interlinked, and teach me where that gap is that I keep having to fill with, like comment dire, des stereotypes that I have to endure, or that I have to see my community enduring, when this whole leg of work that needs to be done by you to, like, make yourself accountable, make your culture accountable, because they also belong to a culture that is working on this war economically and opening its doors to refugees. Where is this rentable for the white cultures, you know? I want to know that.
Yeah, you're very much right, Huda. And this is a story, as you told us, just from a few days ago, very fresh. Fouad, you're clapping. Tell us why.
There is no accountability for the Western world's action in the Middle East in any of these stories. Very rare do we ever see, why are things the way they are back home? A lot of times I've been asked by friends, not knowing any better, why is it like that for women in Pakistan? Why? And it's like, look what happened to America in 4 years with Trump. Look what happened in 4 years. Now imagine that's been happening to your country for 40 years, and you've been funded by the West. Those people causing those problems have been funded by the West. What would happen? And that's the first time when I've seen my friends shift their minds, be like, oh my God, I want to see that in theater. I want to see the accountability there instead of the trauma porn that keeps getting thrown at us. That's what I want to see.
Sophie.
Yeah, I just want to quickly say that it's interesting to think that one of the themes that is being tackled in this play is radicalization and the anger that mounts in people, when actually the way in which the writer depicts Middle Eastern culture actually infuses that anger in Middle Eastern audience members. So it's actually contributing to that, what it's talking about. So yeah.
Right, it's frustrating to watch, to listen to read, and that frustration is not very healthy for us, right? Ghassan, did you want to add anything?
Not specifically. I just want to say that it's not the worst, I personally didn't feel offended, but that's because I've been bombarded for so long with offensive stuff that I just found this, anodin, as they say in French. It's not very very profoundly harmful. But I agree with Fouad completely. I think that, and actually Fouad mentioned that the representation of Islam or of Muslims post 9/11, it even goes way back. Edward Said wrote his wonderful book covering Islam in the 80s, and it was horrible. Watch Lawrence of Arabia, one of the classics of world cinema. Watch the Arabs in Lawrence of Arabia. It's deeply rooted, and the difference is that today Muslims and Arabs, and I think I don't want to compare, pains or problems, but I think Arab Muslims have it a little worse than the rest of than other Muslims, because there is Palestine as well as Islam for the Arabs, which is another huge issue. If it's, well, I was saying that the Muslim minority is the least defended minority today. You would think a little more before you attack another, or not attack, misrepresent another minority. But for Arabs and Muslims, it's the easiest, and there are people who defend freedom of speech in the US against Islam, for example, and they're stars, and that's, for me, that's incomprehensible. I mean, Muslims are the weakest, as a whole, are the weakest group of people, if we ever call them a group of people. That's what I wanted to, that's what was said, evoked.
Yeah, thank you. Huda, you want to jump in here?
Yes. Well, I don't agree with Hassan when you say that it's not causing harm, because I feel not causing harm for an audience to feel that way, because it's a question of projection, actually. And when you project that, then the audience is forced to be complicit with this false projection that our cultures are war-inducing cultures, which is what the whole text keeps saying: war, 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 all the time, as if war is in our blood, as if, this like stereotype, as if our blood is so hot all the time and that we're, we need to react through war, which is not true, because we've developed all of the sciences before, and all of the arts, and why should we bear this weight of silently watching this work being publicly presented, and where are the platforms for us to express the anger that these things are being said without our consent? And so I feel like the projection happens when a culture is not able to look at their own subconscious, as you said, fears, but also, in this case, how are they warmongers? They have not processed yet all of the extent of the genocide that happened here on Turtle Island, and that's something that needs to be addressed before talking about other cultures,
Yeah, thank you. Before Hassan has a chance to respond, Fouad, I want to ask you that what we're getting at here in some ways is the slippery slope of representation, how small, what can feel like a very small misrepresentation, maybe in a broader context, all leads to the same kind of violence. I'm wondering about your thoughts, Fouad, before we hear from Hassan.
Totally. I mean, you can just talk about Apu and The Simpsons. I know it's not Middle Eastern related, but as a Pakistani person, that's something I had to deal with growing up. Oh, it's just, it's a brown guy working at a, you want
What's the big deal?
What's the big deal? I cannot tell you growing up how much violence and abuse I have faced every day after The Simpsons aired. So can you imagine people, a young person watching this play, then going up to a person of Middle Eastern or Muslim origin and assuming these things about them? These are the things where it's like, it's not small. These small, nuanced things that we think are little are huge, because it's telling us in our story, and it's not right. It's not right at all.
Hassan.
I just want to clarify. It didn't cause me personally. I didn't feel offended or harmed. I am completely certain that it's not good to talk about the Middle East in this way, and maybe it's professional solidarity. I don't want to put all the burden on the writer, because I know that she doesn't mean any of this harm. This is it goes much deeper. It runs much deeper than this. And it's not
write it. Why would you write this? I think that's a question the writer needs to ask themselves: is why choose this as the topic?
I agree, but because it's easy. You know, it's easy to write, and like you said, it's a hot topic. ISIS is now very trendy, unfortunately, but there is a whole machine, you know, and I believe that in reference to what Huda just mentioned about the weapon companies, I believe that in its core, it's an economic machine that works to, you know, box and label problems and solutions, so that storytelling becomes an easy consumption, and it's very easy to get sucked into that, you know, even if you mean the best, to write the best story, to represent the most oppressed, etc. You end up, just a very quick example, a film which was a blockbuster, Pursuit of Happiness, if you remember it.
Will Smith.
Will Smith. It's an excellent film, very entertaining, very moving, etc. It really tackles a very big problem, the people who are homeless, who can't sleep. But at the end, the solution is in his own hand. So the problem is his own culture, or his own, I don't know, laziness or whatever.
He should have just worked hard and stuck with it, and then he'll achieve the American.
And nag people to give him a job and so on. And this is horrible to say. Mm-hmm. But what can you do if you want to? You can do a lot, of course. But I mean, it's not, the solution is not to have the to hold the creators accountable for everything, because they work within an environment that is funded by certain institutions that actually is built on social power structures that are sometimes so well established that they become
entrenched. Yes,
entrenched, that they become internalized by writers. And don't forget that there is a lot of money in this business, especially when you exit theater to TV and film. There's a lot of money, and once there's a lot of money, things get much muddier and harder to resist.
So I want to transition us here. What you said is very important. Systemic issues require systemic solutions. They're hard to solve or to help out. But we all know, we could all name various things that could be done. Supporting storytellers from marginalized communities, not necessarily as consultants, but as the actual writers, right? In terms of funding, right? It could be all sorts of things. I want to hear from each of you, rattle off just one or two things that you've been thinking about lately, specific solutions, things that we should do more of to combat some of these very much entrenched issues. And we'll start with Sophie. Anything that you've been thinking about recently? Is it vote for better governments, right? Is it more about funding? What are some things you're thinking about?
Well, I do think that I have seen and felt a progression just in the last few years personally, in terms of there's more diversity and there's more, I feel like there's more of an effort put into to giving a platform for people who have all too often throughout history not had a platform to speak. So I think there's that. I'll let someone else speak.
Fouad, a few things that you've been thinking about.
I had it on and then it's gone. I think, it's gone. Sorry. So
maybe we need more notepads and more pens for marginalized people whose stories we want to hear more of. Maybe that's what we need. We'll add that to the list.
No, actually, what I think is so many people, like Sophie was saying, they've been marginalized, that they haven't been pushed aside. But now, instead of the tokenism that I feel that we still have, it's more stunt casting. It's stunt, like, oh, look how diverse our board of people is. Look how diverse our casting is. what needs to be done now is it's the authenticity, because I'm still seeing projects that are still white helmed, and then they'll just put a bunch of colored faces at the bottom and say, look at us, we're great, without the actual work being done. I still want to see the accountability as well. Just to jump on that is, as an actor, I will get breakdowns that are horrendously racist. To this day, I will still get them, and I'll go back to my agent and say, why did I get this? So then she'll go back to casting. Casting will push back and say, oh, that's what the writer wanted. Well, the writer and the producer and the director, they need to go back and figure that out. Well, that's what the network asked for. Well, then they should fix it up there. They should be accountable for their actions up there before it gets down to me at the audition level. I'm not the one that's supposed to do your work for you.
Mhm.
That's what I want to see changed.
Yeah, thank you. Agreed. Ghassan.
Unfortunately, Fuad, they won't. We will have to make them have to.
Oh yeah, we're gonna make. Yeah.
What I think is, there is a term. I'm very sorry that I don't remember who used it. That was talking about, I think, the Balkan conflict, and then a Syrian intellectual used it for Syria. That there was a depopulation of Syria. There are suddenly people disappear. People, real people who are nuanced, who are different, and that's what people of color, as much as I don't like this term, are to white people. They are groups. Asians are clever. Indians are good at computer. Muslims hit women. I know. And that's what depopulation is, and I'm not talking just about Syria. I'm using Syria as an example. That suddenly you don't hear about Syrians. They are either a part of a refugee crisis, and no one tells you what the crisis really is. It's just called the refugee crisis, and they decided to change it to immigration crisis. No one tells you what the real crisis is. Or they are Assad supporters, murderous regime who is destroying everything that moves, or they are ISIS. People disappear, and I think that what we need to do, a moral responsibility of a storyteller, whether a performer, a writer, a producer, etc., is to repopulate these groups, is to create nuanced people. Salman Rushdie, for example, I was listening to a podcast about the fatwa against him, and there is a big part about how he became the star of the Pakistani community, even though he's Indian, in Britain. It's because of Midnight Children, because he didn't write good people. He didn't present Pakistan or India in the best image possible. He simply wrote real people, and that's why they were very much hurt by the next book, which was the Satanic Verses. And I think that's what we can do when we get the chance. And we are, the people who are in this roundtable are very privileged and lucky to be in democratic societies, relatively.
Mhm.
I couldn't have written what I wrote for the BBC in Arabic, for any Arabic producer. No way. So I think what we can do is this roundtable, what Sophie is doing, which is I think you deserve credit for it, because no one said it. We got too enthusiastic about the misrepresentation. I think this is very important, to take such an example and decompose these elements and explain things, because people, normal people, the audience, the white Quebecois audience, is not evil. It doesn't hate us by principle.
Misguided.
It just needs to see who we are, and you can see examples of this all time. Meet someone from the extreme right, just don't tell him you're a Muslim, and an hour later he will be surprised that you're a Muslim, and they will start to rethink what they think. It's this simple. but the walls are too high. And I don't know. I think that's all we can do. We can keep writing and keep telling our stories and the stories of the people we feel responsible for.
Ghassan, thank you. Huda.
Thank you.
I agree, and I think actually the change is happening because I don't think I've ever seen a writer that would agree to have their script modified and replayed. So I think Sophie is a bridge for that, and I also think Lynn has been doing a lot of work also in that. And the anecdote that I said, like about the person who wanted to write about the explosion, actually, I didn't finish. But when I went back to them, I explained to them I could have just said, no, I don't want to do it. But then I went ahead and I explained why. And then they were grateful. And I know it's like, why should I take the trouble to educate someone, blah, blah, blah. But they actually were grateful, and they offered me even the pay that they would have offered me for being the consultant for. So they're like, people are ready to make repairs, and they actually, it's easy to it's true, Ghassan. I feel like you're bringing up a good point, that it's easy to be like, no, I am the victim, and this is wrong. But at one point, like, yes, we are here, and we are in a place where people know us less, and we are subjected for sure to like the dominant culture, but then it's our responsibility to make our nuances known as well, and to say thanks, to basically acknowledge when the allyship is happening. And so I feel like the allyships are the bridges, basically.
Agreed, Huda. Yeah, finding our allies is very important. To close things out here, Sophie, go for it.
I just want to ask you, we haven't heard from you. How do you feel about that? What do you think?
About what in particular, Sophie?
About like, what do you think we can do? Or like, I know that you're a great activist in the work that you do too. Like, you have things to say.
My short answer, because we could do another 3 hours on what we could do, and I realized that when I asked the question. Take every opportunity in our lives, walking down the streets, where you buy your groceries, what groceries you buy, which plays you see, every single decision we make is an opportunity to contribute to the kind of world that we want to see. I honestly believe that every dollar that goes towards the clothes on our backs, right, and who's making them, right, these sorts of things, right? Every decision is an opportunity, including the bigger ones, who we vote for, which decides on funding for different groups, this sort of thing. To educate ourselves of not just our intentions, but, as Fouad would point out, the impact, which is completely different, and sometimes in fact the opposite of our intentions. All the tools are at our fingertips. And I think one of the frustrations for us, for people here in the roundtable today, is it's all on Google. Like, if you really want to learn, you can learn, right? So we're getting a little bit tired of some of the excuses we hear day in and day out about, systems, or, about intentions, these sorts of things. It's all there. We have greater accountability because, the solutions, the education is all there available for you. So that's what I would say. It wasn't as short as I thought. The one question I want to close on is to get everybody to say, in one sentence, I dream of. That's all. One sentence, I dream of. Finish the sentence. And I know I'm putting you on the spot here. So I'll start. I dream of a world where we hear real stories from real people. Let's go to you, Fouad.
Pass me for now. Come back.
All right, no worries. All right, let's go to Ghassan.
I start by saying that I share your dream. And what I really dream of is where storytelling is international. That means independent of identity. I don't want to be presented as Syrian and I want to be presented as a person, as an individual with a story. If it's interesting, then I want it to be told. If not, Tom P.
Too bad. That's right. Thank you, Hassan. Huda.
I dream of a world where I can see visibly where this story and this story goes like this, and like exactly like this place, which I know is called also in biodiversity, it's called an ecotone. It's like, where does the forest meet the, let's say, the river? There's like an ecosystem in between that's alive and that's real, and that makes all of these, connections possible. And they're invisible, these stories, at the moment. I wanna know the stories that link us together.
Thank you, Huda. I agree. Fuad.
I dream of one day watching, being a part of, creating new, real, and authentic stories.
Thank you. And Sophie, we'll end with you.
So much pressure. Okay, there's one silly answer and one answer that's a bit more serious. So the silly answer is, I don't know if everybody saw the ad that came out at the end of COVID, the chewing gum ad. I want a world that's that. Check it out if you don't know what it is.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't say I do, but yeah.
Everyone is just presented like this diverse like world that was just, it was just love. And everything was great. And the second, I guess, I think it's starting, but I would really love young members of minority families living in Western worlds to feel like they could be an artist with a voice and won't be boxed in or feel like they'll never make it because of who they are. So I'm hoping that we're moving towards that as a reality. So
I want to thank each of you for sharing your perspectives here. I know we could speak for another few hours about this. I appreciate you being here. I also want to say thank you to our audience. Thank you for coming and spending your time with us. We invite you to leave comments here. You can share your support. You can email us at antioch@talisman-theater.com. I want to thank you for spending your evening with us today. Merci, thank you, salam.